Vista Jet is the fastest growing private jet company in the world. Thomas Floor, founder and chairman of Vista Jet, joins us now from our London studios to discuss the growth in the numbers, especially when it comes to travel into Africa. Good to have you with us this afternoon, Thomas. I'd like us to start by taking a look at the increase over the last 5 years. It has increased quite substantially when you take a look at the trips from outside the continent coming in to Africa. What's driving this? Is it business or leisure?
Good afternoon. How are you? Well, we had very strong growth from corporations flying to Africa, both from Asia into Africa as well as from Europe. So we recorded over 5,000 flights in the last 5 years into Africa and from Africa to other continents. So we see that especially accelerating over the last 12 months. We had an increase year over year of intercontinental flights by up to 40%. So we're very pleased with those numbers.
To come back to the question, what's driving the travel into the country? Is it your business executives flying here to review the investment case offered by many African states?
Yes, that's correct. We have probably about 80% plus of the business is driven by entrepreneurs looking at investment opportunities in Africa and actually traffic within Africa. So we see business leaders from different countries flying to other African countries. And at any given point in time, currently, we have between 8 and 10 aircraft stationed in Africa. So we're not an operator from Europe who flies down there picking up clients. We have actual planes sitting in Africa serving our African clients.
I would like us to take a look at the geographics in Africa. The top three are Nigeria, South Africa, as well as Angola. I take it that this comes as no surprise, as these are the leading economies on the African continent. But is there slight nervousness, especially when it comes to the performance of the potential African economies, given the strong reliance on commodity prices?
No, we don't see any exposure just particularly to commodities. We see the emerging markets actually performing very strong. There is unfortunately very little infrastructure of business jets within Africa, so we saw that as our opportunity. Africa is our most important growth market. So commodity prices have not influenced any of our business. If anything, it has increased over the last year, as the numbers show. We also diversify very much into other countries, Kenya, Mozambique, the whole east coast of Africa sees very strong growth in the last 12 to 18 months.
Thomas, looking at the flights from Europe coming into Africa, that increased by 40% year on year. From Asia, though, it only increased by 10%. I found this a little bit odd, given the fact that we always hear about the Chinese or Asian activity on the African continent, especially when it comes to an infrastructure perspective.
I would agree on paper it looks a little bit odd, but we saw a lot of business leaders flying from Europe into Africa. You sometimes have also Asian companies who first go on a trip to Europe and then from Europe into Africa. You know, from Asia, specifically from China, this is sometimes a 12 to 14-hour flight, which not necessarily, you know, some people do non-stop. They probably come to the Middle East first for other meetings and then go from the Middle East to Africa. So you cannot necessarily just look at the non-stop flights from Asia into Africa when you look at Asian business leaders going to the African continent. They sometimes come from Europe and the Middle East as well.
You've mentioned that obviously Africa is the most important growth market for you. Can one read these numbers, and does it show us and indicate where the foreign direct investment is coming to from an international perspective when it comes to Africa and investment into Africa?
Well, the African, there's twofold growth. The one is African countries investing into each other. Obviously, Nigeria is a super important market for us, so is South Africa. And you know, from both countries, we see investments into different areas of Africa. And then we see international flights from Europe, from the United States, from other regions, going to Africa and considering investments. And that's really, you know, driving the growth. And very often people go on to tours, visiting different countries on the same trip. And that's ideally done on a business jet because you can actually perform those trips in a very much shorter and a more effective period of time than doing it commercially.
Thomas, thank you so much for your time today.